Well, we had on Congressman Salazar from the Southern CD, I believe it's CD4, and the issue was the Pinyon Canyon issue, where the Army is going to try to seize over 250,000 additional acres for the training base down there. And it very much was a situation where people who have traditionally been Republican ranchers and farmers are now saying, wait a second, this is not the country, this is not the land that I thought I was living in, because now all the values that I'm holding to my family and my generation, my future, are being put in threat by the very administration that I supposedly have believed in. So we are seeing a shift from, well, out here, and I'll have you answer this, from not only Democrats reclaiming their populist message, but what I've read about the libertarian Republicans who are more hands-off Republicans, but are conservative, kind of revolting against this conservative extremism.
I absolutely agree. I mean, I think that there is again an unholy alliance between libertarian conservatives and sort of corporate conservatives, if you will. That alliance, it's not a natural alliance, and I think that we're seeing on all sorts of issues how that is now fraying. Absolutely. I mean, another example is the Patriot Act. You know, I remember I was up in Montana, and we had a Senate candidate up there named John Tester, a farmer, who was campaigning vigorously against the Patriot Act, saying it's imposing on people's privacy. You know, people have a right to the rule of law, protecting their rights to privacy. And of course, you know, some folks back in Washington don't understand that not everybody in the country likes the Patriot Act, and in fact don't understand that many conservatives, true rock-ribbed conservatives, don't like the idea of big government being able to look into what they're doing. And so there was a funny quote. You know, Chuck Schumer, the New York senator, said during the race, he said, you know, we need to reauthorize the Patriot Act because we need to do it because I'm worried about my red state candidates. Well, what an idiot. Because John Tester's out there using the issue, running against it, using the issue to cut into and attract conservative voters for himself, and he's got his own party colleague from New York back in D.C. saying he wants to reauthorize the Patriot Act because that's good for red state candidates. It's not good for red state candidates if you know how to talk about that issue. Look, the Patriot Act's important. I mean, there are certain important provisions in it. The idea that reforming it is somehow politically risky when in fact it allows Democrats to go on the offensive with conservative voters, I mean, that's just ridiculous. And you know, you're not going to believe a Democrat either. Remember, one of the ardent opponents to the Patriot Act is Butch Otter, the governor of Idaho, who when he was in the House was one of the most conservative members of Congress. If Democrats out here learn how to effectively go to those fissures in the Republican Party, they really have a chance to build a majority here that'll last a long time.
And we're going to come back to that. We're going to take a quick break. I'm your host, Wade Norris, for Ultimate Politics and UP News. And our guest today is David Sirota. We're talking about changes in the Mountain West region and the upcoming convention in 2008. And we'll be right back here on 1510 AM. And we're back here on Ultimate Politics on 1510 AM. I'm your host, Wade Norris. We're back here with David Sirota. And we were talking about some of the issues as far as framing, details, and the way that Democrats in the West talk about issues that are traditionally conservative, but how we can, as Democrats and progressive, reclaim those issues. And you were talking about John Tester and the Patriot Act. Let's talk about also, there's one person that is our Senator Ken Salazar, and a year ago he was crucial in preventing the so-called nuclear option from occurring in the Senate when he joined with John McCain and other legislators to become the Gang of 14, which was a centrist Democrat and Republican group that came up with some compromises to keep the filibustering and the so-called nuclear option. Let's talk about why that was relevant then and why that's maybe not the best thing now that we're in the majority.
Right. It was relevant then, I think, because first of all, it protected the way the Senate runs, which can be horrible and can be great. But you know, it's been running that way for 200 plus years. So, I think we can all be at some level happy that the whole process didn't explode. The problem with what he's doing now is that it's not productive, and I'm specifically talking about what he's trying to do now in the Iraq War.
And go into detail. What are you talking about?
Right. The Senate right now is debating a proposal, a couple proposals actually, to legislatively end the war, and it's everything from, there are proposals out there to set a date where we will start drawing down troops, to making sure that troops have a certain amount of rest between the time that they come home from deployment and have to go back out for deployment. Really common sense stuff with the force of law. The problem is that Ken Salazar is proposing a bill that doesn't have the force of law, that simply says that the report from the Iraq Study Group a couple months ago, a bipartisan group, just basically says that the report from the Iraq Study Group should be implemented by the Bush administration, but it's really an encouragement. It's not really a...
So there's no teeth.
There's no teeth at all. Now, people might ask, well, if it's a statement that's pretty good, well, what's wrong with that? Why, what's the problem? Well, here's the problem. If you need to pressure Republicans to vote for the bills to end the war, the ones that really end the war, or really have the force of law, any time that you give them an ability, a legislative vehicle to claim that they are supposedly against the war,
it gives them a veil of cover.
Exactly. So to speak. It gives them an out. It's exactly what they want. Ken Salazar has delivered to Republicans what they absolutely desperately need. And I'm not talking here as a partisan. The problem with that is not that he's helping Republicans. The problem is that he's helping Republicans who don't want to end the war prevent the war from ending. He's giving Republicans the political cover.
Republicans like who?
Oh, Republicans like Pete Domenici, Norm Coleman, Gordon Smith, these folks who in particular are up for re-election.
And they're in kind of vulnerable races.
Exactly. So the idea is the legislative strategy to end the war in the Senate is, listen, let's pressure Republicans who are worried about running for re-election. Let's find a way to pressure them to support something that actually ends the war. What Ken Salazar has done is given them a way to pretend that they're for ending the war, when in fact they're not going to end the war.
I'm for ending the war as long as it's through a suggestion, not through the rule of law.
Exactly. And that, as we've seen, that's not going to move the Bush administration. The Bush administration is not interested in suggestions. The president has basically said, unless you force me to do something, I'm basically not going to do it. And so what Ken Salazar has done is really undermined the efforts of the people who are really trying to end the war. He's undermined it in a very brazen way. He's a freshman senator. It's like, what are you doing? There's a legislative strategy here that you have basically dumped all over, and you've created a situation now that by result of your actions, potentially, this war is going to go on longer than it needs to go on.
Well, let's not just pick on Senator Salazar. There's real consternation among Democrats concerning the House. Why House Democrats, sent Bush a funding bill that would have stopped the war or stopped the funding for the war. He vetoed it, and people like the person I'm a fan of, John Edwards and Move On and Dennis Kucinich, were very vocal in saying, just send back the same bill. Send back the same bill. Make him be the one that has to defend his veto. And for some reason, which I still have yet to find out the reason for, the Democrats apparently gave in and said, okay, we'll fund the war.